That was the view really for decades, that civilization began about 6,000 years ago.
For thousands of years. One mystery has captured the imagination of humankind, the lost city of Atlantis. A magnificent civilization said to have existed thousands of years ago before vanishing suddenly beneath the waves. Was it real? Or just a legend invented by the Greek philosopher Plato? For centuries, explorers, scholars, and dreamers have searched for it across the world, from the depths of the Mediterranean to the frozen expanses of Antarctica. But in 2025, something truly unbelievable was found, something that might finally solve the greatest mystery in human history. This is the story of how modern science may have just uncovered the truth behind Atlantis. The legend of Atlantis begins not with explorers or cartographers, but with a philosopher, Plato, writing in 4th century BC Athens, nearly 400 years before the birth of Christ. In 2 of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he described a tale he claimed to have inherited from much older traditions, a story passed down through the Egyptian priests of Sais to the Greek lawgiver Solon, and later to Plato's own family. According to the dialogue, the priests told Solon of a powerful island civilization larger than Libya and Asia combined, lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. This civilization, known as Atlantis, was said to have flourished some 9,000 years before Solon's time, placing it around 9600 BC. A date that still astonishes scholars today for its alignment with the end of the last ice age. Plato wrote that Atlantis possessed vast resources, fertile soil, precious metals, and advanced engineering beyond anything known to the ancient world. The land was divided among 10 kings, descended from the god Poseidon and his mortal consort, Cleito, forming a confederation bound by shared laws and divine heritage. At its heart stood a shining capital, a city constructed in concentric rings of land and sea, connected by bridges, its walls plated with bronze, tin, and the mysterious red gold alloy known as orichalcum. To Plato, Atlantis represented a society in perfect harmony, a balance of wisdom, virtue, and prosperity. But over generations, the Atlanteans became corrupted by greed and power. They sought to conquer the known world, their armies marching east toward Egypt and Greece. In response, the gods punished them for their arrogance in a single day and night of misfortune. Plato wrote, "The island of Atlantis disappeared into the sea and vanished for more than 2 millennia." Scholars have debated what Plato truly meant. Was Atlantis a literal history, a memory of a real ancient catastrophe perhaps inspired by the eruption of Thera that destroyed the Minoan civilization around 1600 BC? Or was it a moral allegory, a philosophical warning against the decay of virtue and the dangers of imperial hubris? Even today, classicists and historians remain divided. Some, like Benjamin Jowett and Sir Desmond Lee, treat Atlantis as a thought experiment illustrating Plato's ideal state and its corruption. Others, including Ignatius Donnelly in the 19th century and modern geological theorists, argue that the level of technical and geographical precision in Plato's account suggests he was drawing from earlier Egyptian or Near Eastern records of real events. Whichever view one takes, the story endures because it touches something universal, the fear that even the greatest civilizations can vanish overnight, leaving only myths behind. As the classical echoes of Plato's writings faded into the Middle Ages, his story of Atlantis passed from scrolls into speculation. By the time Europe entered the Age of Enlightenment, scholars had begun to treat the tale not as sacred memory, but as puzzle and metaphor, a test of how myth and evidence could coexist. Historians sought rational roots. Some proposed that Plato's island was inspired by dim recollections of natural disasters, perhaps the volcanic cataclysm that destroyed the Minoan world on Thera, or the sudden floods that reshaped the Mediterranean at the end of the Ice Age. Others insisted it was pure invention, a philosophical stage on which Plato dramatized his ideas about ideal government and moral decline. By the 19th century, the question had escaped the libraries and entered the field. Explorers, naturalists, and early geologists began searching for physical traces of the vanished realm. Expeditions fanned out across the globe from the Mediterranean seafloor to the Caribbean trenches, from the Azores to the Antarctic shelf. Each claimed discovery stirred excitement, but none delivered proof. Gradually, Atlantis became a fault line between science and imagination. To the academic establishment, it symbolized how easily wonder could masquerade as evidence, a cautionary tale against seeing patterns where none existed. Yet beyond the universities, A new generation of independent thinkers began to suspect that the story might hold more than metaphor. They argued that legends survive for a reason, that fragments of truth can outlast the civilizations that create them, and for a few of these restless minds. The silence of evidence was not discouragement, but invitation. The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter its most controversial chapter, led by a man who would question everything we thought we knew about human history. They argued that legends survive for a reason, that fragments of truth can outlast the civilizations that create them, and for a few of these restless minds. The silence of evidence was not discouragement, but invitation. The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter its most controversial chapter 1 that would divide academia and awaken a global audience. By the late 20th century, a new kind of researcher began to emerge, one less bound by institutions, and more driven by the patterns that traditional archaeology had long ignored. He was not a scientist in the formal sense, but he spoke to millions who felt that official history had grown too narrow, too certain. His name was Graham Hancock, a British journalist and author who spent decades challenging the boundaries of accepted knowledge. While others followed textbooks, he followed anomalies, ruins, myths, and symbols that didn't fit within the linear story of human progress. To Hancock, Atlantis was not a metaphor, but a memory, the echo of a lost civilization erased by catastrophe thousands of years ago. He believed that ancient myths from across the world, from the biblical flood to the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, and the Native American legends of a drowned world were all fragments of the same event, the end of a forgotten age. Hancock proposed that a massive comet impact near the close of the last ice age unleashed floods, earthquakes, and fire cataclysm that obliterated nearly every trace of that earlier. Advanced culture. His theories shocked academia. Most scholars dismissed them as pseudoscience, labeling his work speculative at best. But the public saw something else. His message resonated a world far older, far wiser, and far more mysterious than we had been taught. For millions, Hancock's words posed a question that refused to go away. What if history, as we know it, is wrong? What if humanity's story is not a straight line of progress, but a recurring cycle of rise, collapse, and rebirth? His investigations took him from the pyramids of Egypt to the temples of South America, tracing clues that seemed to link distant cultures as if they all descended from a single lost source. To Hancock, Atlantis was not merely a city, it was a symbol of humanity's forgotten genius, and a warning about its fragility. And soon, new technology would begin to reveal patterns that even he could not have imagined, evidence suggesting that what he called a myth might, in fact, have been a memory all along. As technology advanced, the oceans began to reveal what centuries of legend could only suggest. For the first time, myth and science were starting to share the same horizon. In the late 20th century, divers off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, discovered an enormous stepped monument carved from solid rock terraces, platforms, and stairways descending into darkness. Some geologists said it was simply the work of nature, sandstone split by tectonic shifts and erosion, but others weren't so sure. The edges were too straight, the angles too perfect, as if a forgotten hand had shaped the stone long before the sea claimed it. Far across the world, in the Bahamas, sonar scans traced long, geometric lines on the seafloor, a pattern locals called the Bimini Road. Scientists explained it as fractured beach rock, but the shapes looked too deliberate, too symmetrical, as though pieces of an ancient harbor still lingered beneath the waves. Then came similar reports near the Azores, off Portugal, and around Malta in the Mediterranean regions once above water when Ice Age seas were hundreds of feet lower. Each discovery reignited the same question. Were these scattered ruins nature's coincidence, or the remnants of an age erased from history? Geologists reminded the world that sea levels rose dramatically after the Younger Dryas, the great melt that ended the last ice age nearly 12,000 years ago. The very window when Plato said Atlantis fell. If any civilization had lived along those ancient coastlines, their cities would now lie drowned beneath the sea. Most archaeologists urged caution, warning that resemblance is not proof. Yet, with every new scan, every unexplained structure, the pattern grew harder to ignore. Across continents, the ocean seemed to whisper the same impossible story of something advanced, something lost, waiting just below the surface. For the first time, the timelines began to align. The legend and the science were no longer enemies. they were starting to rhyme. And deep beneath the waves. The myth of Atlantis was beginning to breathe again in the last decade. Technology has done what centuries of speculation could not. It has begun to see the unseen. Satellites, deep-sea sonar, and advanced geological mapping have given scientists the power to peel back the layers of Earth's forgotten past. What once demanded a lifetime of guesswork can now be scanned, rendered, and measured in breathtaking precision across the globe. Research teams began mapping coastlines and seabeds with high-resolution sonar and LiDAR, searching for anomalies, circles, lines, and geometric patterns that nature rarely makes by chance. What they found was unsettling. Beneath miles of sediment and coral, the planet began to reveal the outlines of a lost design. Some of the most intriguing data came from places long tied to the Atlantis legend, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic near the Azores. Detailed imaging exposed enormous, buried formations roads that seemed to connect to nowhere, rectangular grids beneath sand, and vast circular depressions eerily reminiscent of Plato's rings of land and water. In Malta, divers found stone ruins that appeared older than any known Mediterranean civilization, megalithic structures resting on what had once been dry seabed. In the Caribbean, sonar picked up kilometer-long grids, like the ghost map of a city erased by rising seas. Each find deepened the same quiet suspicion that something immense had once been here, and that history had chosen to forget it. Still, mainstream scientists urged caution. Natural formations, they warned, can imitate architecture. Random symmetry doesn't equal intent, but the evidence kept accumulating, whispering a pattern too persistent to ignore a pattern that reached beyond continents, connecting sites thousands of miles apart. For the first time, the boundary between myth and measurement began to blur. What had once been philosophy was turning into data, and yet, even with all the scans and maps, no single place matched every detail of Plato's description. Atlantis remained an echo always close, never caught, until researchers turned their gaze away from the sea and toward one of the driest, most lifeless places on Earth. In the endless expanse of the Sahara Desert, where the horizon melts into heat and silence, lies one of Earth's strangest scars, the Richat structure, known to the world as the Eye of the Sahara. From above, it looks almost impossible, a vast spiral of concentric rings nearly 40 kilometers wide, as if the desert itself were looking back at us. For decades, scientists dismissed it as nature's art, the slow work of erosion, uplift, and wind over millions of years. But when satellites began scanning the region in higher resolution, something curious appeared. The symmetry was too exact, the proportions too deliberate. When researchers laid Plato's description of Atlantis over the eye's geometry, the match was eerie, as though an ancient blueprint had been burned into the bones of Africa. Plato spoke of a city built in perfect rings of land and water, a central island, bridges connecting each circle, and a great canal reaching out to the sea. The Eye of the Sahara, though parched today, mirrors that pattern almost exactly. Its dry channels radiate outward like the veins of a long-vanished harbor. It's as if the desert once breathed with tides. Further studies deepened the mystery. Beneath the sands, scientists found the ghosts of ancient riverbeds and floodplains, proof that this place now barren and lifeless was once lush, green, and filled with flowing water. Geological samples told an even darker story, layers of sediment displaced violently, as if by a cataclysm, floods, earthquakes, upheaval. The kind of devastation Plato had described when Atlantis sank beneath the sea. Archaeologists who dared the desert heat uncovered fragments of pottery, tools, and worked stone, scattered like the remnants of memory. Some pieces dated back thousands of years, far older than any known culture in West Africa. Each shard whispered the same unsettling possibility: we might not be the first to walk this land. When the seismic data finally confirmed evidence of massive ancient flooding, even skeptics began to pause. The eye wasn't just a geological oddity, it was a story written in stone, waiting for someone to remember how to read it. The revelation rippled through both science and imagination. Could it be that Atlantis had never drowned beneath the ocean, but had been buried beneath the desert instead? For many, the evidence was impossible to ignore. The scale, the proportions, the location, even the age all aligned too precisely to dismiss. The Eye of the Sahara had become more than rock and sand. It was a mirror, reflecting our oldest question back at us. What if the myths were memories? Standing before this vast spiral of earth and silence, one can't help but feel a quiet unease, the sense that history is larger, older, and more fragile than we ever dared to believe. Perhaps the line between legend and truth has always been there, half buried, not beneath the waves, but beneath the sands of time. When the first images and data from the Sahara began circulating online, the world stopped to look. The Eye of the Sahara, once an obscure geological curiosity, had become the epicenter of a storm. Scientists, historians, and amateur researchers alike pored over satellite images, geological maps, and the words of Plato, comparing every detail, every measurement, every line. The more they compared, the harder it became to dismiss. The Rishat structure's diameter, its perfect symmetry, even the elevation differences between its rings mirrored Plato's description with uncanny precision. It was as if the philosopher's tale had finally found its reflection in the real world. Not everyone was convinced. Many geologists stood firm, insisting the formation was a natural result of erosion and volcanic uplift, nothing more. To them, the alignment with Plato's account was coincidence, an illusion born from wishful thinking. But others argued that the geometry was too deliberate, the patterns too exact. Nature, they said, rarely builds circles this perfect, and never twice. The academic world divided. Some dismissed the idea as pseudoscience. Others, quietly, began to wonder. Expeditions were planned, and silent scientists, archaeologists, and geophysicists heading into the desert, hoping to find hard evidence before the world made up its mind for them. As the story spread, public fascination ignited into obsession. Millions began to ask a question that history had long avoided. What if we've been wrong? If a civilization as advanced as Atlantis had truly existed only to vanish in cataclysm, then how many other chapters of human history might still lie buried, forgotten beneath sand and sea, for the first time in living memory? The line between myth and archaeology began to blur. What was once legend was now data. What was once dismissed as fantasy was being measured, mapped, and debated in scientific journals. And somewhere between skepticism and belief, a deeper realization began to form, one that transcended evidence, that every civilization, no matter how powerful or enlightened, stands on borrowed time. The same forces that raise us earth, water, fire, and time will one day reclaim what they have given. If Atlantis was real, then perhaps it was never just a story about the past. Perhaps it was a message left for the future, a warning carved not in words, but in the ruins of time itself. Today, the mystery of Atlantis continues to ignite scientists, explorers, and dreamers around the world. Whether the Eye of the Sahara is truly the lost city or simply one of nature's most astonishing coincidences, it has rekindled something rare, humanity's longing to understand its own forgotten past. For thousands of years, the legend of Atlantis has stood as both a beacon and a warning, a story of brilliance undone by arrogance, of knowledge consumed by its own pride. It reminds us how fragile civilization truly is, and how easily progress can vanish when wisdom is replaced by ambition. Modern science is beginning to catch up with ancient myth, with every scan, every excavation, and every new discovery. We are realizing that legends often carry fragments of truth, echoes of real events preserved in the collective memory of humankind. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes we are not just studying the past, we are confronting ourselves. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be found as a city of stone, but as a mirror reflecting who we are, what we can achieve, and how easily it can all be lost. Because the real mystery was never under the sea or beneath the sand. It was within us, in the part of humanity that remembers, dreams, and hungers to know where it all began. So, as we look to the stars and dig into the earth, we must also look inward. Have we truly learned from the civilizations that came before us, or are we building our own Atlantis all over again? If this story made you pause, question, or wonder, share it, discuss it, keep the conversation alive, because maybe, just maybe, rediscovering Atlantis isn't about finding a place at all. It's about remembering what it means to be human, before we, too, are swallowed by time.